Begin. Full dismantlement.
I'm Jake Morrison, 52M, and 7 years ago, my wife Sarah left me for Marcus Sterling, a real estate mogul worth hundreds of millions. Sarah took our daughter Emma, now 25, with her when she moved into his massive estate. The divorce was brutal. Sarah implied she'd reveal certain things about my past if I fought for custody, so I backed down completely to protect Emma. For context, before I became Jake Morrison, the security consultant, I had a very different career under a very different name. I was known in certain exclusive circles as the architect, someone who specialized in systematic corporate destruction and reputation warfare for clients who could afford my services. Think untraceable financial demolition, reputational annihilation, making powerful people's enemies disappear from relevance completely. I built empires from the shadows and destroyed them just as easily. At my peak, I was directly responsible for bringing down at least 7 Fortune 500 CEOs, dismantling their companies so thoroughly that most people forgot they'd ever existed. My specialty was constructing elaborate scenarios that appeared to be natural business failures or personal scandals, but were actually precisely orchestrated campaigns designed to eliminate specific targets. I had assets embedded in major corporations, government agencies, media organizations, and financial institutions. People who owed me favors, or who I had leverage over, or who simply respected my ability to make their problems disappear. For 15 years, I was the most feared name that was never spoken aloud in boardrooms across 3 continents, but I retired that identity completely when I met Sarah at 37, wanting nothing more than a normal family life with a woman I genuinely loved. I was tired of the isolation, the constant paranoia, the inability to form real relationships when your entire existence is built on lies and manipulation. Sarah represented everything I'd never had: warmth, authenticity, the possibility of being loved for who I really was. I buried my past so deep that even government agencies tracking me gave up and declared me dead. Created Jake Morrison from scratch with help from people who owed me massive favors. New identity, new history, everything meticulously crafted to withstand scrutiny. Birth certificates, school records, employment history, social security numbers, credit reports, medical records, all fabricated but absolutely authentic in every database that mattered. For 20 years, I was just a regular dad and husband, teaching Emma to change oil and understand compound interest, building the kind of stable, loving home I'd never had growing up. When Sarah left, she knew exactly how to keep me from fighting back. One phone call about revealing my true identity would have destroyed not just the quiet life I'd built, but potentially gotten everyone I cared about eliminated. Too many powerful people had reasons to want the man I used to be dead, so I let them go. Watched from a distance as Marcus systematically turned Emma against me with carefully constructed lies. Told her I was dangerous, unstable, potentially violent, not worth her time or attention. The daughter who used to call me her hero stopped returning my calls, sent back my letters unopened, refused to see me. For 7 years, I played the part of the defeated ex-husband perfectly. Lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda, worked my boring security consulting job helping small businesses install alarm systems. I kept my head down, paid my child support religiously, sent birthday cards that were never acknowledged. But I never stopped watching. Never stopped gathering information on Marcus Sterling with the patient, methodical thoroughness that had once made me legendary. Marcus Sterling had built his empire on fraud, manipulation, and carefully constructed facades. His real estate company was essentially a Ponzi scheme dressed up in expensive suits and charity galas. He inflated property valuations, created phantom investors, siphoned funds to offshore accounts, bribed city officials, and systematically defrauded anyone foolish enough to trust him. I documented everything: bank transfers, recorded conversations, falsified inspection reports, payoffs to politicians, the whole elaborate criminal enterprise. I told myself I was just keeping insurance in case he ever came after me directly. The truth was I was waiting. Part of me hoped Emma would eventually see through his charm. Part of me thought Sarah might recognize that trading love for money had been a mistake. But mostly, I was just biding my time until Marcus gave me a reason to show him exactly who he'd chosen to make an enemy. Fast forward to last month, I received this cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. Emma's engagement announcement to Derek Fairchild, son of Bradford Fairchild, who runs Fairchild Technologies, one of the biggest tech companies on the East Coast. Emma personally called asking me to come, which surprised me since we'd barely spoken in 3 years. Her voice was different, nervous, maybe even hopeful. She said she wanted her real dad there for the most important night of her life. My friend Pete, the only person from my old life who still checks in on me, thought it was a trap. "They don't want you there to celebrate," he warned. "Marcus is planning something. These people aren't known for mercy." But I couldn't resist the possibility that Emma genuinely wanted me in her life again. Against Pete's warnings, I decided to attend. The Sterling estate sprawled across 8 acres of prime real estate, with perfectly manicured gardens and a mansion that looked like European royalty. I parked my modest Honda between a Bentley and Ferrari, feeling distinctly out of place in my only decent suit. Security guards with earpieces scrutinized every guest. When I gave my name, the head guard's eyes widened slightly before waving me through. The mansion's grand ballroom was something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers casting light across marble floors. Oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. The room overflowed with society's elite. Senators, governors, celebrities, business titans mingling while a full orchestra played classical music. I recognized faces from magazine covers and news broadcasts, people whose decisions affected millions of lives, who controlled vast fortunes. This was Marcus's world now, and by extension Sarah's and Emma's, the kind of power and wealth I'd once moved against from shadows, but never aspired to join openly. Sarah looked completely different from the woman I'd married 25 years earlier. The natural beauty I'd fallen in love with had been sculpted into something artificial and cold. Expertly highlighted hair, subtle cosmetic procedures, designer gown clinging to her frame like it had been sewn directly onto her. She laughed brightly at something someone said, but I recognized the tension around her eyes, the forced quality of her smile. Same look she'd had when hiding something during our marriage. I spotted Emma immediately and my breath caught. At 25, she was absolutely stunning. She had inherited her mother's beauty, but my intensity, the determined jaw, the analytical gaze that missed nothing. Her engagement ring was massive, catching the light as she gestured while speaking to Derek, who seemed like a decent young man. Tall, well-dressed, attentive, he clearly adored her, which was all any father could ask for. When Emma noticed me across the crowded room, surprise flickered across her face, followed by what might have been relief. She excused herself and made her way toward me, weaving through clusters of guests. "Dad," she said, stopping about 3 feet away. "You came. You asked me to," I replied simply. "I wasn't sure you would after everything that's happened between us." "I'll always come when you call, Emma. No matter what's passed between us, you're my daughter and I love you." The words hung between us, weighted with 7 years of absence and carefully constructed lies designed to keep us apart. She stepped forward awkwardly for a hug, and I enveloped her carefully, noticing how she tensed before relaxing into the embrace. "I've missed you so much," I said quietly. "I've missed you too, Dad. More than you know. Come meet Derek. I think you'll like him." That's when Marcus Sterling made his entrance. Silver-haired, perfectly tailored in what was probably a $10,000 tuxedo, radiating confident arrogance that only comes from inherited wealth and unchallenged power. He moved through the crowd like he owned everyone in it, accepting congratulations and deference as his natural due. When he spotted me with Emma, his expression shifted, a flash of annoyance quickly masked by his practiced politician's smile. He positioned himself directly between Emma and me, his back to his stepdaughter, in a gesture clearly meant to establish dominance. "Emma, darling," he said without turning around, his voice carrying that condescending tone wealthy men use when they expect immediate obedience. "The Hendersons are asking for you. They want to congratulate you on your engagement. Why don't you join them by this champagne fountain?" His tone left absolutely no room for argument. Emma glanced between us uncertainly, clearly torn between wanting to include me and not wanting to cross Marcus in front of his guests. After a moment's hesitation, she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Don't go anywhere, okay? I want to introduce you to Derek properly." Then Marcus turned to face me directly, and I saw the cold calculation in his eyes that I'd been studying through surveillance cameras for 7 years. This wasn't spontaneous rudeness. It was a carefully planned power play designed to humiliate me in front of the most influential people in the city. "Webb," he said, deliberately using my last name instead of any polite greeting. "I have to say I don't recall seeing your name on the approved guest list for tonight's celebration." "It was there," I said calmly, "right below daughter's father. which I believe still qualifies me for attendance. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, technically speaking, yes, though I have to say it was a technicality I probably should have addressed during planning. You understand, this is really a celebration for family and close friends. I qualify as both, I replied evenly. Sarah finally approached, her designer heels clicking on marble, her face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. She clearly knew what Marcus was planning and was trying to minimize damage. Jake, please, she said, voice tight with strain. Let's not make a scene tonight. This is Emma's night. No one's making a scene, Sarah, I replied, not taking my eyes off Marcus. I came here to congratulate my daughter on her engagement and meet the man she's chosen to marry. Nothing more, but Marcus wasn't done. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only guests in our immediate vicinity could hear, but ensuring plenty of people were within earshot, the kind of calculated humiliation that wealthy, powerful men have perfected over generations. Listen carefully, Webb, he said, voice dripping with contempt. I think there's been some confusion about your role here. You seem to think you can just waltz into my home, into my family's celebration, and pretend to be part of something you were never really part of to begin with. I remained perfectly still, expression unchanged. 25 years of reading people had taught me that silence could be far more devastating than any verbal response, but Marcus interpreted my silence as weakness and pressed his advantage. Let me make something crystal clear for you, he continued, voice growing more confident. You are nothing here, less than nothing. You're a sad footnote in Sarah's past, a mistake she was smart enough to correct before it was too late. The surrounding guests had subtly created a circle of space around us, pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. Conversations had quieted just enough that Marcus's voice carried further than he probably intended, which I suspected was exactly what he wanted. Go back to your pathetic little apartment and your pathetic little job and stay there, he said, clearly enjoying every moment. Emma has a real father figure now, someone who can actually provide for her, protect her, give her the kind of life she deserves. She has me. Emma had returned from her conversation and was standing frozen beside Derek, her face pale with mortification as she witnessed her stepfather's systematic humiliation of her biological father. Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable, his expression darkening as he watched the man who was supposed to become his father-in-law reveal his true character. Nothing to say for yourself, Webb? Marcus taunted, his voice rising slightly. I'm not surprised, really. You never could stand up for yourself, could you? That's why Sarah left you in the first place. That's why Emma chose to come live with us instead of staying with a weak, pathetic loser who couldn't even keep his own wife happy. The words echoed in the sudden silence that had fallen over our section of the ballroom. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor, clearly believing he had achieved some kind of decisive victory. Behind him, Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear, and Emma's eyes had filled with tears of embarrassment and anger. I didn't raise my voice, didn't clench my fists or show any sign of rage that most men would have displayed. The complete absence of emotional reaction seemed to unnerve Marcus more than any outburst could have. After 25 years in the business of systematically destroying people who thought themselves untouchable, you learn that silence and control can be the most terrifying responses. I understand completely, I said finally, my voice so calm it was almost conversational. I reached into my jacket pocket and extracted my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't used in 15 years. If you'll excuse me for just one moment, I need to make a quick call. I walked several paces away, far enough that they couldn't hear my words, but close enough that they could see I was having a conversation. The number connected on the second ring. This line is supposed to be dead, came the familiar gravelly voice with its slight Eastern European accent. The spider waits while the web trembles, I said quietly, using the old code phrase that felt strange after so many years of normal life. A long pause. Alexander? Is that really you? Hello, Dmitri. I need a favor, a big one. I thought you were dead. That was the agreement when you disappeared. The agreement was to protect my family, I replied, watching Marcus across the room as he basked in what he thought was his moment of triumph. I don't have a family to protect anymore. What do you need? Execute Protocol 7. Full spectrum dismantlement. Target is Marcus Sterling, Sterling Properties and Development. I want his entire world burned to the ground. Another pause. Are you certain? Once we begin, there's no stopping it. I'm certain. Begin immediately. I ended the call and returned the phone to my pocket, then walked back toward the group. "My apologies for the interruption," I said politely. "Just catching up with an old friend I hadn't spoken to in quite some time." Then I walked toward the exit without another word, ignoring the whispers that followed me across the marble floor. Sarah caught up with me in the mansion's foyer. "Jake, wait!" she called out, voice trembling with anxiety she couldn't hide. "That was completely uncalled for. Marcus just gets protective sometimes." "Does he get protective of you the same way?" I asked, studying her face and noting the almost imperceptible flinch my words produced. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means, Sarah." I could see fear creeping into her eyes. "Tell me, was it worth it? Trading 20 years of marriage for this gilded cage?" "I'm happy," she insisted, but the words sounded hollow. "If you say so." I turned toward the door. "Jake, wait, what was that phone call about?" I paused with my hand on the door handle. "Just catching up with an old friend, like I said. You might want to prepare yourself, Sarah. The next few days are going to be very interesting for your husband." Here's where the real story begins. The phone call connected me to Dmitry Volkov, my former handler who'd helped me disappear 15 years ago. Within 30 minutes, he'd activated a network of assets and contacts I'd hoped never to use again. People who owed me favors that could never be fully repaid, who'd stayed in shadows long after I'd retired, who understood that some debts transcend time. Dmitry had evolved since our last contact. No longer just a handler, but the center of an information brokerage network extending into government agencies, corporations, media organizations, and financial institutions across 6 continents. When I'd disappeared, he'd taken the infrastructure I'd built and expanded it into something far more sophisticated. Within hours of my call, the first phase of systematic dismantlement was in motion. Bradford Fairchild received a carefully curated package of information about my true identity. Not everything, but enough to make him understand exactly who his son was about to marry into. Bradford had his own secrets, his own reasons to avoid association with someone who had once moved in the circles I'd inhabited. More importantly, he had old money paranoia that made him retreat from anything that might bring unwanted scrutiny to his family name. Bradford pulled Derek out of the engagement that same night, giving him an ultimatum he never fully explained, but that Derek was smart enough not to question. Derek showed up at Emma's door at midnight, returned her ring, and walked away from what he'd believed was the love of his life, without offering any real explanation beyond, "My family can't be associated with yours." Emma was devastated, confused, and completely unprepared for how quickly her perfect life could shatter. But Derek's withdrawal was just the appetizer. The main course was Marcus Sterling's complete professional destruction, which began the following morning. For 7 years, I had been documenting Marcus's criminal enterprise with methodical thoroughness. Sterling Properties was essentially an elaborate fraud scheme, dressed up in expensive suits and charity galas. Marcus had been systematically inflating property valuations, creating phantom investors, siphoning funds to offshore accounts, bribing city officials, and defrauding anyone foolish enough to trust him. I had bank records, recorded conversations, falsified inspection reports, documentation of payoffs to politicians, evidence of tax evasion, proof of money laundering, everything needed to destroy him completely. Lawrence Bishop, Marcus's business partner and childhood friend, was the first domino to fall. Lawrence had been kept deliberately in the dark about the full extent of Marcus's criminal activities, serving as the respectable face while Marcus handled creative financing behind the scenes. Dimitri's people delivered comprehensive evidence to Lawrence's home, making clear he had perhaps 24 hours to distance himself before the scandal became public. Lawrence was no fool. He'd built his own fortune by knowing when to cut and run. Within hours, he'd called a press conference announcing that recent discoveries of concerning financial irregularities had led him to sever all ties with Sterling Properties, effective immediately. He turned over additional evidence to federal investigators, cooperated fully with the SEC, and hired the best crisis management firm money could buy. Simultaneously, 3 major investment firms, Martinson Group, Apex Capital, and Hamilton Trust, received anonymous but thoroughly documented evidence of Marcus's fraudulent practices. These weren't small players. They collectively controlled over $50 billion and had influence that could destroy reputations with a single phone call. Within hours, they were demanding emergency audits, freezing investments, and publicly distancing themselves from anything connected to Sterling Properties. The Securities and Exchange Commission received an anonymous package containing enough evidence to launch a full-scale investigation. Banking relationships that had taken Marcus decades to cultivate crumbled overnight as financial institutions scrambled to avoid association with what was clearly becoming a massive fraud case. Marcus had no idea who was destroying him or why everything was falling apart simultaneously. He spent that first day making increasingly frantic phone calls, trying to reach Bradford Fairchild, attempting to reassure panicked investors, desperately calling in favors from politicians who suddenly didn't want to take his calls. I watched it all from a rented apartment across town, monitoring surveillance devices I'd placed in Marcus's home and office 3 years earlier. The man who'd humiliated me in front of hundreds of people was falling apart in real time, his carefully constructed world collapsing faster than he could comprehend. But I wasn't finished. The third phase was Marcus's complete social destruction, executed at the Metropolitan Museum's annual charity gala 3 days later. This was an event Marcus couldn't miss without confirming everyone's suspicions about his financial troubles, so he and Sarah attended despite growing whispers about Sterling Properties' problems. I arranged for the museum's sound system to be compromised during cocktail reception, replacing gentle background music with recordings of Marcus's private conversations. Not surveillance tapes that could be traced back to me, but recordings captured by devices that Marcus's own trusted associates had been carrying for months without knowing it. His own words condemning him, captured in his home office, his private club, even his bedroom as he bragged to Sarah about how easily he manipulated the investment dinosaurs who trusted him. The recordings revealed Marcus mocking his investors, making crude jokes about seducing other men's wives, bragging about bribing city officials, and expressing contempt for the charity organizations he publicly claimed to support. But the most damaging recording was Marcus discussing his plans to frame Lawrence Bishop for the company's crimes, laughing about how he'd manipulated his childhood friend into signing documents that would make Lawrence the fall guy when everything collapsed. The room fell completely silent as hundreds of the city's most influential people heard Marcus reveal his true character. Politicians whose campaigns he'd funded, investors who'd trusted him with their fortunes, social leaders who'd welcomed him into their exclusive circles, all listening to the man they'd respected mock them, their money, their wives, and their intelligence. Sarah disappeared from Marcus's side as the recordings played, her face pale with mortification and dawning comprehension. When the audio finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Marcus stood alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of people staring at him with expressions ranging from disgust to fury. The humiliation was total, public, and broadcast to exactly the audience whose respect and fear had built Marcus's power. Within minutes, people were leaving the gala early. By evening's end, Marcus Sterling was effectively a social pariah, cut off from the networks of wealth and influence that had sustained his empire. The final phase was Marcus's complete personal destruction, systematic elimination of everything he thought made him powerful. His offshore accounts were frozen by federal agencies in 12 countries simultaneously. His luxury cars were repossessed. His art collection was seized as evidence. His private jet was grounded. His country club memberships were revoked. His charitable board positions were eliminated. Even his personal security team was quietly paid more money to walk away than Marcus could offer them to stay. Within a week of insulting me at Emma's engagement party, Marcus Sterling had gone from being worth hundreds of millions to being effectively bankrupt, unemployable, and facing decades in federal prison. Everything he built, everyone he'd trusted, every relationship that had mattered to him, all of it systematically dismantled with the kind of precision that had once made me legendary. I visited Marcus one final time, finding him alone in his home office, surrounded by empty liquor bottles and watching news coverage of his spectacular fall. When I walked in, he didn't seem surprised. "Webb," he said, attempting some semblance of his former arrogance. "Or should I call you by your real name now?" "Either works," I replied calmly, settling into the chair across from his desk, though, technically, only one of those identities officially exists anymore. "What do you want?" he asked. "Come to gloat over your handiwork?" "I came to offer you a choice," I said. "You're going to confess to federal authorities tomorrow morning. Every crime, every sufferer, every corrupt deal you've ever made. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And if I refuse?" "Then additional evidence will emerge implicating Sarah as a knowing accomplice in your crimes. Bank records showing her signature on fraudulent documents, recordings of her participating in meetings where illegal activities were discussed, testimony from witnesses who'll swear she was actively involved in planning your schemes. The threat wasn't entirely fabricated. Sarah had been more involved in Marcus's business than she'd ever admitted, signing documents she should have questioned and attending meetings where criminal activities were openly discussed. With the right presentation, a prosecutor could easily argue that she was a willing participant rather than an unknowing sufferer. Marcus broke completely. The next morning, he walked into the FBI field office and confessed to everything: money laundering, securities fraud, bribery, tax evasion, racketeering, crimes spanning 15 years and involving hundreds of millions of dollars. He named co-conspirators, revealed hidden assets, and provided evidence that led to dozens of additional arrests. In exchange for his cooperation, Marcus received a sentence of 7 years in federal prison instead of the life sentence he would have faced if he'd fought the charges. It was more mercy than he'd shown any of his sufferers. Sarah lost everything in the aftermath: the mansion, the cars, the jewelry, the social standing, the luxurious lifestyle she'd betrayed our marriage to obtain. All gone, seized by federal agencies or lost to civil lawsuits filed by Marcus's sufferers. She tried to reconcile with me, showing up at my apartment late one night, claiming she'd made a terrible mistake and still loved me. 7 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words, I told her as she stood crying in my doorway. I would have forgiven everything, taken you back without question, rebuilt our family from nothing if necessary. And now? She asked, hope flickering in her eyes despite everything. Now I see you clearly for the first time, I replied. You're not here because you love me, Sarah. You're here because you're running from the consequences of your choices, looking for someone to save you from the mess you've made. There is no us anymore. There never will be again. Emma reached out after she uncovered the truth about Marcus's crimes and who I really was. She spent days digging into the name Alexander Kozlov, piecing together stories about a man intelligence circles called the Architect, a master of quiet ruin who broke powerful people and companies with perfect precision, then vanished so completely, most assumed he was dead. We met at the old waterfront park where I'd taught her to skip stones when she was 7, back when she thought I was the best man alive, and I believed being her dad was all that mattered. I know who you really are now, she said as she sat on the bench, careful to keep a small gap between us, unsure whether to fear me or admire me. Do you? I asked. You were Alexander Kozlov, the architect. You took down corporate giants, politicians, anyone who crossed your clients. They say you never failed, never left a trace, never showed your face. You made people vanish. That was a long time ago, Emma. Not that long, she said, her voice trembling. You destroyed Marcus in less than a week. His business, his name, his freedom. All because he insulted you at my engagement party? No, I said flatly. I ended Marcus Sterling because he was a thief who conned people for years. Because he turned you against me with lies. Because he stole 7 years of my life as your father and thought he'd never pay. And now Derek is gone. My engagement, my future, my shot at happiness, wrecked because of who you are. Derek left because he learned the truth about the family he wanted to marry into. If he truly loved you, my past wouldn't matter. Running proves he wasn't worthy of you. Emma began to cry. I wanted to comfort her, to promise everything would be fine, to be the dad who could fix it all with a hug and wise words. But some bridges can't be fixed with kindness. I'll always be your father, I said. That never changes. But trust, once broken, is hard to mend. For 7 years, you chose to believe the worst of me. You accepted their story because it was easier than questioning the people who gave you a soft life. I was 18 when Mom left you. I was scared and hurt. And in the years since, the ignored calls, the returned letters, the visits you refused, you chose to believe I was dangerous instead of asking me. You chose to think I didn't love you instead of letting me prove it. Some wounds don't heal with tears or apologies. Some betrayals leave scars no regret can fade. Emma lost her fiancé, her stepfather, her mother's security, and any real chance to make things right with me because she chose lies over the father who would have died for her. But that's how justice often looks. Not neat or clean, but messy. Actions, choices, consequences. Marcus Sterling got exactly what he earned. Public shame, federal prison, his empire smashed, his name in ruins, his freedom gone, just as he stole so much from others. Sarah learned that chasing money over love leaves you with neither. Emma learned that comfort over truth costs everything that truly matters. As for me, I went back to a quiet life, no longer hiding who I am or what I can do. The man Marcus mocked as a nobody had taken apart everything he valued, every ally, every trust, every piece of meaning. Without rage, just the cold precision that once made me feared. The quiet guy in the corner isn't always knocking. Sometimes he's just waiting for a reason to show what he can do. Marcus Sterling learned that the hard way. I didn't just take revenge, I delivered justice. When the system fails and the powerful feel untouchable, sometimes justice must come from the dark, from someone who knows some debts can only be paid in total ruin. The spider waited in his web for 7 years. When Marcus chose to humiliate me, he walked straight into it, and once he was caught, there was no way out.